to introduce our guest. We are thrilled to have Jeff Gotthelf here today. And Jeff is a former Bentley MS-HFID student, and he helps organizations build better products and executives build the cultures that build better products. He is the co-author of the award-winning book, Lean UX, that is used today in our MS-HFID courses, and the Harvard Business Review Press book, Sense and Respond. Starting off as a software designer, Jeff now works as a coach, consultant, and keynote speaker, helping companies bridge the gaps between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. And he most recently co-founded Sense and Respond Press, a publishing house for practical business books for busy executives, like many of you joining today. And his most recent book, which he'll be covering here today, is Forever Employable, which was published in June 2020. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jeff to the stage to deliver a great presentation.
Terrific, Laura. Thank you so much. Hey, folks, a pleasure to be here, and nice to see all of you here. It's always it's fun. Look, it's been a year. All of us are reaching our pandemic anniversaries now, and it's been a year of working this way, and I'm kind of getting used to it and enjoying it. And what I've put together today for us is a mix of stuff. So there's the way that the session is going to be broken down. We've got 90 minutes total together, and the plan is to do all in all, the way it's going to break down is roughly about 30 minutes of presentation, 30 minutes. There's an exercise that we're going to do together. So it's a bit of a workshop part of it, give you a chance to try out some of these things and bounce some ideas off of each other and myself as well. And then time for questions. Obviously, if questions come up throughout the presentation, throughout any of the activities, please put them in the chat. Laura and I will be keeping an eye on the questions that pop up in there, and we'll get to those at the end. So I'm going to do all the questions at the end. And there's a Zoom hand raise functionality, which I assume most of you are familiar with by now. We'll use that at the end as well to ask any specific questions. Beyond that, I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to share my screen, and we will get started. Let me just share my screen here and then start the presentation. Okay, there we go. All right, so look, so this is a story about becoming forever employable. And that's the name of the most recent book that I wrote, which is a bit of a change for me. As Laura mentioned, the first book that I wrote was called Lean UX, and it's a design book. It's a software design book. I was a designer, wrote it for designers. That was the point of it. And it really helped kind of redefine a lot of what I do for a living. I'm going to talk about that in a second. In fact, I'm very, very proud that it's being used in the MS-HFID program at Bentley these days as a textbook. I wrote a business book called Sense and Respond. And most recently, I wrote this book, Forever Employable, because there was a continuous stream of inbound requests for me to share my story, to talk about how I built my business, how I wrote the books that I've written, and how I kind of reversed the flow of my career, which traditionally is more of a push system where you push yourself into opportunities, into job openings, into interviews, and we give up control of that particular progression, right? We leave that in other people's hands. Instead, how do you turn that 180 degrees and create a situation where you are continuously attracting opportunities towards you? And so that's the story I'm going to share with you today. It's going to be very practical and tactical. And like I said, there's a portion of it where I'm actually going to ask you to try something, to kind of think through a short exercise that we will do together to see how this fits for you and your career and your progression and so forth. But let's start. The story starts on January 31st, 2008. January 31st, 2008 was my 35th birthday. That was the day I turned 35. And on that day, I woke up in a cold sweat. Really, I woke up in a panic, and I couldn't figure out why. I was trying to understand kind of what was making me so anxious on that particular morning, because I do love my birthdays. Doesn't matter which birthday it is. I'm a fan, but I woke up in a cold sweat that day, and I couldn't figure it out because up until that point, things have been pretty good. This is me at 35. Those are my kids when I was 35, just to give you a sense of where those kids are today. I mean, I had a couple more hairs on my head, not too many more, but the kids, the one in the middle there, she goes off to college in the fall, which is terrifying. In fact, she was born when I was at Bentley. So when I was in the HFID program, she was born then, and she's off to college in the fall, and her sister starts high school in the fall as well. So that's what those kids are, and they're running around Barcelona these days. And on top of that, look, I'd had a pretty good run getting up to 35, right between sort of the end of university. I actually started off as a broke musician. I played in bands for a long time. I'm a keyboard player, played in touring bands, primarily based out of Virginia. That's why I saw Roanoke. Somebody here from Roanoke, spent a lot of time in Roanoke and Blacksburg, Richmond, that whole area, and just kind of playing up and down I-95. And when I got tired of being broke, the internet happened and saved me, really. In the late 90s, the internet kind of became a thing. Web 1.0 came around. And in 1999, if you could spell HTML, you could get a job in web design and web development. And I could do a little bit more than spell HTML. I could actually do a little bit of front-end design. I taught myself how to do that. And so I got a job as a web designer. And a web designer back then simply did graphic design and some markup, very basic website development. And that was great. And that was my first job. And then one day, my boss came in and said, "Hey, who wants to be an information architect?" Which is kind of this new position. And I said, "That sounds interesting. What do we know about it?" And he said, "Well, we have this book." And so I took this book. This book is called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. It was new in 1999. Today, it's in its 4th edition. This book is still relevant today, which is amazing. The authors of that book changed my life, because I went home over the weekend and I read that book, and I came back to work on Monday and I said, I want to do this, because information architecture was, it felt like there was a bit more responsibility there than just sort of web design and markup. I got to actually make some decisions which appealed to me very, very much. And so I changed direction, went towards this web design, and finally had direction in my career. Interaction design, user experience design, that's where I was headed. And crap, the dot-com bubble burst. And that was a bit of a shock for me. And I just got going, just got my career in place, and I was bouncing around just trying to stay employed to find a job in tech now that I wanted to be a web designer. But nevertheless, I landed on my feet. Even if it was every 6 months for a couple of years there, because companies kept disappearing. I spent some time, moved back to Virginia, ended up working at America Online for a few years. So if you ever got one of these CDs in the mail at any given point, I had something to do with it, so you're welcome. I wasn't solely responsible for them, but if you ever got one of them, that was on me. I moved to the West Coast and worked at Web Trends. And right around the time I was turning 35, I found myself back in New York City as the director of user experience and design at a company called The Ladders. The Ladders is a job board. And back then it was a place for people who made $100,000 or more. That was who the jobs were for. And so in about 10 years of my career, I'd clawed my way up to middle management. Basically, I was 10 years in, and things were pretty good, right? I had a good job. You saw my kids. They were cute, still cute today. I had I was living in New Jersey now, commuting in and out to New York City. And everything was going great. And so why did I wake up on my 35th birthday in a panic and in a cold sweat? And then it dawned on me. Why. I realized that on my 35th birthday, in 5 years, I was going to be 40. Now, when you're 35, or when you're on just that side of 40, 40 feels like death. Like that's the end of the world. Like that's it. You're done. After that, nothing's going to go on. From this side of 40, I can tell you it's pretty awesome. I mean, I'd love to be 40 again, but it's not a big deal. But at 35, I'm like, man, in 5 years, I'm going to be 40. I'm going to be old. I'm going to be expensive. And I'm going to be unemployable. And I knew this because I was a hiring manager, and I was hiring designers into the field on a monthly basis. And these younger, better, faster and hungrier and, most importantly, cheaper designers were coming into the space on a regular basis. And I was terrified that when I turned 40, I was going to age out. I wasn't going to be able to make the same amount of money that I wanted to make. I wasn't going to be able to continue to land the jobs that I'd been landing up until this point. And there was no way I was going to provide for my family, be able to provide for my family. And that was terrifying for me, really, just absolutely terrifying. And that's why I woke up in a cold sweat on the morning of my 35th birthday. And so on that morning, I made a resolution to myself. And it was a resolution that in hindsight completely transformed how I approached my career moving forward. The resolution was this: I was no longer going to look for jobs. Instead, I was going to create a situation where jobs were going to look for me. I was going to take the dynamic and flip it on its head, right? Instead of me pursuing opportunities, I was going to create a dynamic where opportunities were going to look for me. That's the resolution I made that day. And you're saying, oh my God, Jeff, that's absolutely mind-blowing. Those words, you just blew our mind with that resolution. But right? You can say those words, and those are nice words to say, but it brings up a lot of very, very important questions and very tough questions to answer. These were the questions that I immediately set out to answer once I decided that I was going to flip the dynamic and create a situation where jobs are finding me. Number one, if jobs were going to find me, does anyone know who I am? And I would argue that in 2008, not very many people did. Okay, so people are going to have to figure out who I was and know who I was. That's very, very important if opportunities are going to find me. Second question, why would they look for me? Let's assume they know me. Okay, but then why would they look for someone like me to help them? Right? What is the problem that I help them solve? What is the service that I provide that would make them come look for me? If they decide to look for me and they know who I am, how would they find me? Where would I live? Where do I want to exist? And especially, where do I want to exist online? Now, in 2008, you've got LinkedIn, you've got Google, you've got all kinds of services, right? So the question is, where do you want to exist online? Very, very important. And then lastly, and equally as important as all of these questions is, let's say I successfully do this. Let's say people know who I am. Let's say they understand why they would look for me, what problem I help them solve. Let's say they can find me. Well, what kind of work do I want to find me? I don't want just anything finding its way to me. I want opportunities that I'm interested in, that are challenging, that make me better at my job, that help me grow and expand, and so forth. And so I set out to answer these questions after declaring that I was no longer going to look for jobs. Now, the way that I knew how to do this, and the way that I still kind of think that the best way to do this, is to create a platform and to use that platform as a magnet to continuously pull in opportunities, to attract opportunities towards you. Now, a platform, the way that I see it, is a combination of my experience and my expertise, content generated from that experience and my expertise, and an audience that is consuming that content on a regular basis. And hopefully, the more that you do that, the size of that audience grows and the size of that platform grows. And the bigger that platform grows, the more opportunities you begin to attract yourself. That was the hypothesis I set out to solve. And in fact, that's what I did. I spent the next 10 plus years, in fact, at this point, it's 13 years, building my platform. And I continue to do that today. And in doing so, I discovered that there were 5 qualities that I needed in myself to become forever employable. And I'm going to talk about those in a second. And in addition, in hindsight, I recognized that I took 5 very explicit steps to becoming forever employable as well. And if you add these things up, the way that they come together and kind of the epiphany that I had about this was that you have to treat your career and your professional development as a product. It's a thing that you make for others. Other people consume it, and you know that you've delivered something of value, that you've made a good product when more people start to ask you for that product. Hey, that looks pretty good. I'd like some of that as well, right? And so if we start to think of our career and our professional development as a product, we start to reshape how we approach improving it and how we better understand the market that we're serving. So if you work in any kind of situation where you create a product for somebody else to consume, this is exactly the same approach. We think of what we provide as a product, and we have an audience that we want to consume and to buy that product. Now, I told you there were 5 qualities that I discovered in myself to becoming forever employable. The 5 qualities I discovered in myself were these: entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, continuous learning, improvement, and reinvention. I want to look at each one of these for a second and kind of give you a sense of how I discovered them in myself. So entrepreneurialism. I had never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I was never the ideas guy. I was always the execution guy. If you have a good idea, I'll help you get it done, right? But entrepreneurial was never something I associated with myself. But when I set out to build this platform, I realized that I actually had been entrepreneurial throughout my life. I told you earlier I played in bands, right? Bands are startups. Bands, you and your friends get together, you have a crazy idea, you think it's going to change the world, you pour everything that you have into it, right? You sleep on floors, you eat ramen, everything that you need to do is you're trying to build this entity and make it a successful business. I played in several touring bands and I managed those bands as well. I had been entrepreneurial. So I had those skills. I just had to go find them and put them to work here in my career development, my professional development. Self-confidence was something that, look, I was on stage from high school all the way through my late 20s. And so that certainly gives you a lot of self-confidence when you're on stage in front of people kind of playing your music and performing and trying to get out there. But I was looking for opportunities in my life or stories in my life that really, truly helped me believe that I could overcome any situation. It turns out, again, so hindsight is always 20/20. When you're experiencing something, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's that significant. But in hindsight, it definitely was. So when I turned 22, and I graduated from undergraduate school from James Madison University in Virginia, I joined the circus. True story. I graduated on a Saturday. I put all of my stuff in storage on the next Sunday. All my stuff, by the way, when I was 22, consisted of my mattress, my motorcycle, and a Bob Marley poster. That's basically what I owned when I was 22. I put all that stuff in storage and I joined the circus. This circus right here that you see on the screen here. And I spent 6 months on the road touring with the circus. Now, I don't know what you know about the circus. I know a lot about the circus, probably more than most folks as well. It is its own world. It's a 200-person community. And I was an outsider. I was a stranger thrown in, and I had to survive. I had to thrive. I had to find my way in there. I had to make friends. I had to make alliances and to be successful. And it took a lot of trial and error. But coming out of that experience after 6 months, I was successful. I'd been successful within the circus. And I lean on that experience all the time to know that I've got the self-confidence to overcome the challenges that I face in my life. Continuous learning is something that I've weaved into everything that, or I've woven, into everything that I've done up until this point. Whether it's reading this book that changed my career trajectory, staying active in my community, reading articles, listening to podcasts, whatever it is, paying attention to what's happening and always learning and trying to stay current on what's happening in my domain is extremely relevant for me. And then I use those learnings to improve what I do all the time, right? So I'm always taking the ideas that I've formed, and I'm always trying to make them better. There's a phrase that I love that I learned from a TED Talk, one of the most cliche things you can say today, right? But I learned it in a TED Talk, and it's a TED Talk by a guy named Astro Teller. Astro Teller is a great name. He's the guy who runs X, which is Google's innovation lab, their moonshot factory. And in his TED Talk, Astro Teller talks about this concept of enthusiastic skepticism. Enthusiastic skepticism, I love this concept. It's this idea that, yes, you're good at something, but you're skeptical that it's the best that you can be at it. And so you're enthusiastic about finding ways to get better about it. And that's what I do in my craft all the time. Now, the photo that I'm showing you on screen here today is actually very important because this is a photo taken 1 year ago today, coincidentally. This is the last time I was in front of a live audience teaching a class. This is Paris. This is March 11th, 2020. And it's a little sad that it's been a year since I've done that. But the reason I'm showing you this photo in this context is because I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of workshops and a lot of training these days. And one of the ways that I get better, look, and I think I'm pretty good at it. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm not the best. And other people are very good at it as well. I teach with other people all the time. In this particular case, I was teaching with a friend of mine, also named Jeff. By the way, I don't just teach with people named Jeff, but nevertheless, Jeff and I were teaching together in Paris, and I learned from him. He and I teach the same things, but we come at it from two different sides, and I learn a ton from him. And so I'm continuously improving what I'm doing. And then ultimately, there's this idea of reinvention, this idea that what got you here won't get you there. And that's one thing that I'm always paying attention to, which is how do I take what I know today and what I'm good at and reinvent it for the current context. So for example, one of the things that I do a lot of is this idea of product thinking. I teach product thinking, which is a mix of design thinking, lean startup, user-centered design, agile software engineering. But now I'm applying it to teams that don't necessarily make products in the traditional sense. Teams like human resources, legal and finance and marketing and so forth. And the same ideas work really well in those departments, but we're just reinventing it for that context. In fact, that the article that I'm on screen here is one I wrote for Harvard Business Review, talking about exactly that, why these ideas make sense in these professions. And so these are just the 5 qualities that I found that I needed to have to build this platform and become forever employable. Now, I've got a poll to show you, and I'm curious about what you think. I'm going to launch this poll, and I'm curious what your strongest quality is. Of those qualities that I just showed you that are on screen, what do you think your strongest quality is? All right? Is it entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, learning, improvement, or reinvention? I'm always curious to see where this nets out. But there definitely has been a pattern since I've been asking this question publicly for the last 6 to 8 months or so. Yeah, if you get a chance to get in there and vote on this, that'll be great. We're almost at 75% voted. Let's see where this goes. And then after this, we'll see where this nets out. We're gonna do a little exercise together to put some of these ideas into practice. So let's see how that goes. Okay, I give it another 15 seconds for folks to vote. We're at 83% voted. What's your strongest quality? What do you think it is of these? If you were to pick one as the thing that you think you're strongest at. Looks like the popcorn has stopped popping at this point. So I'm going to end the poll. Let's see where we net it out and share the results. Okay, so continuous learning, overwhelmingly, well over half the folks who voted, which is almost everybody, said continuous learning is what they're best at. And that's terrific, right? And I think you really need that to be successful today. It always, always surprises me how low self-confidence is. Every time I do this, self-confidence is always, always the lowest one of these. And it's amazing to me. It's one of the things that I'm going to talk about after the exercise is why you should believe in yourself and how you really do have a unique perspective on the world and a terrific story to tell. But this is super, super interesting, right? So good to see that learning is top of mind for most folks. Self-confidence is something we have to continuously work on. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Let's do this next. We're going to do a quick challenge together. As I share what the challenge is, Laura's going to set you up into these kind of randomized pairs. So just for accountability, we're going to do some Zoom roulette here, and you're going to end up in randomized pairs. Now, the challenge I'm going to ask you to work on together is to answer the question, why would jobs look for you? Right. So if you were to flip this model on its head, the job search, traditional job search model on its head, and say, look, I'm not going to look for jobs anymore. Jobs are going to look for me. Why? Why would jobs look for you? In other words, what problem do you help people solve? Now, here's how this is going to work. Okay. We're going to set you up in random pairs. Hopefully it's somebody new that you've never met. Please be nice to each other. Okay. Spend a minute introducing yourselves to each other. So a minute each to say, this is who I am, this is where I live, or this is where I work, or what I do, that type of thing. Just don't waste too much time with intros. A minute each is perfectly okay. You'll have a total of 10 minutes to work together. So the breakout rooms will launch. You'll have a total of 10 minutes to work together. Okay. And then when you come back, we'll do a little bit of sharing back of your answers. Now, the prompt that, again, I'm going to remind you of the prompt. I'm going to show you an example of what I'd like to see when you come back, okay? The prompt is, what problem do you help people solve? Why would jobs look for you? What problem do you help people solve? Now, what people always do with this exercise is they start with their job title. Well, I'm a project manager. Okay, so what? Why would people look for you? And so the first pass is I'll say, well, I help bring projects in on time and on budget. Okay. That's a good start. I want you to dig a little bit deeper, right? So we're kind of going to go 3 layers in. First layer is always your job title, right? Or what it is that you'd like to do. So the next pass is like, well, okay, here's what that job does. Okay. But now I want you to think about what you do, kind of what is your unique version of that title, job. Again, what problem do you help people solve? So I ensure everyone on my team is at their most creative, productive, and successful without burning out, right? That's really interesting. That's certainly a facet of project management. And that's something that that's a problem that you help people solve. Okay. So that's what we're going to ask you to do. So once again, the prompt is, what problem do you help people solve? We're going to give you a total of 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, we're going to close the breakout rooms, come back and do a little bit of sharing back, and then continue the story from there before we get to the Q&A. Sound good? Okay. Laura?
Right. Ready to go. Rooms are opening.
All right. Excellent. This is my 10-minute timer, by the way.
And I did notice, as people are finding their way to their rooms, there's someone who called in that will need to be sent to their appropriate rooms. So we might have someone that's waiting that I will have to move. So I'm going to hop into that room. It's room 5 to see where they are, where their name is, so that I can plop them into the right room. So I
sounds good.
We'll do that. But we also have 2. All right. And here they come.
Excellent. Just give a second for everybody to come back here, and then we'll jump right back into it. Are all the breakout rooms closed?
It looks like there's a couple others just finishing talking.
Okay. I just want to give it just a second, make sure everybody's back.
Yep, 3 more seconds and they'll officially be back in the main room.
Got it. All right, we got everybody back. Terrific. Great. Welcome back. So I want to do a little bit of sharing back at this point, just to get a sense of how that exercise went for you and maybe where you netted out. Is there anyone who is interested in sharing kind of what answer they came up with for themselves for what problem do you help people solve? And to let me know, just if you could use the Zoom hand raise functionality, that would be great. And then we can, Laura can unmute you and we could hear your voice. Anybody want to share? Excellent. Eugenio. Okay, we need to let me, I'm gonna let you unmute. All right, there you go.
There. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, perfect. So I was sharing that I currently do management consulting. So the right straight answer was, well, consulting.
Yeah.
When I thought about it, I think what I actually help people do is get to the root cause of a problem they currently have, like what is actually causing the problem, and then creatively help them figure out ways of addressing that problem. So it's like getting to the cause of the problem and then adding creativity to that to see like, okay, what can we do with this?
Right. Super valuable. Right. So helping folks really understand what is actually the real problem they're solving for, and then how to get around that, which is far more powerful and compelling than consulting. Right.
Yes.
Like, and I'm not trying to take away from what you do. Right. But consulting is just, it's a generic word. Right. And so it becomes far more compelling to say, I help people get to the root of the problem and then creatively solve it.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. That's fantastic. I see a hand from Olena. Olena, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yes, sure. So I decided to practice my self-confidence just to help you raise those numbers.
Excellent.
Well, I also do consulting, but I rarely present myself as such. I help small and medium-sized companies grow and find ways to overcome the blocks and the obstacles that they face and meet on that trajectory. And as obviously there are 1,050,000 consultants out there. My differentiator is that I have a variety of backgrounds and experiences, and I'm a full stack marketer and strategist. And I typically intervene at the strategy level, where the business owners, most frequently work with business owners, still need to figure out and shape up the vision and sort of, set the direction for many other different kinds of helps. So I tend not to grab all the work that there is, but I tend to stay at the top level where the strategy is.
Got it. Excellent. And look, again, it's interesting, right? Because especially if you've been working for a few years, that set of options can be really big. And what's interesting about articulating what problem you help people solve is that, especially if you're trying to build this platform for yourself, it's about sizing it correctly, sizing it to the point where you don't go out there and say, look, I can do 17 different things, because if you do 17 different things, I don't know what to come to you for. Right. But if you do 3 things, or at least if you decide to share, you might be able to do 17, but you're saying, look, these are the 3 things that I'm going to build my platform on. Well, I know that when I need those 3 things, I'm going to come to Olena, right? And so, like, a clarifying question I would have for you, you said, look, I help organizations grow and overcome obstacles to growth, right? I would ask you a clarifying question like, well, what kind of obstacles, right? Is it high, like scaling the staff? Is it legal challenges for scaling? Is it management challenges, right? That would be
strategy and sales and marketing. Go-to-market strategy and sales and marketing. Yeah.
Perfect, right? So if you're starting to kind of refine that statement into what problem I help people, I help organizations get, scale their marketing strategies, right? So they can get from small to medium to high growth, et cetera, right? So that's something that and again, that's important, because look, if I work for GE, I'm not going to seek you out, right? And that's okay, because you're not looking for me, but if I work for a company like, I don't know, I can't think of a small company at the moment, right? But like a startup, like a high growth startup that's finding some traction, some product market fit, and they don't know how to scale into the next marketplace, right? I'm coming to you. Now I understand exactly what problem, because you're going to help me solve that problem. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. That was great. Gitanjali, I'm going to ask you to unmute. I hope I said your name correctly.
Yes, yeah, that was close. Yeah, Gitanjali.
Okay, I just went for it. Excellent. Terrific. What problem do you help people solve?
So I am currently a user researcher, senior researcher, and originally I fell into kind of like the common trap that you mentioned of just talking about my role. But then I was trying to frame it as the problem. So this is what I have. I help people get answers to open questions that they have about people interacting with technology in order to help drive informed decisions and inspire action.
Excellent. Right. So yeah. So again, like research is a good one, right? Like I get the kind of research that you do, but there's infinite subdivisions of research, and really research delivers that value that you just described, which is like, I provide insights between humans and technology to help you improve the technology for the humans, or to make the humans more successful, right? Something along those lines. Which again is important, because that's the problem that I have. The problem that I have is I have a piece of tech and I think it's awesome, right? But my users don't think it's awesome. And so you help me understand why that is and how I can make them more successful. Cool. Nicely done. Anybody else? Maybe do one more? Any last volunteers? I saw a few more hands earlier and then they took their hands down. So I'm not going to say whose hands I saw, but anybody else want to share? Practice their self-confidence? All right, Tracy, excellent. Go ahead. I think I've added.
Okay. There we go. All right. I was given permission to unmute myself. Yeah. And I guess testing kind of the self-confidence thing too. So I'm working on figuring out what my elevator speech is for what I want to do. And there's problems that I'm helping people solve now. And there's also problems that I want to kind of shift to helping people. So I would say kind of one of the ways that I'm putting it is like, I help people kind of cut through chaos and confusion by connecting people on, kind of like a deeper level. So, and I guess a more practical way of saying that is kind of similar to what the first person has said, is like, let's figure out what the root cause of the problem is. And then let's, kind of talk about it as humans. Like, I think my real skill that I'm hoping to kind of move to is using, kind of empathy and soft skills to connect people and then also help them to become better versions of themselves. And so right now, the way that I'm doing that, kind of every day is, okay, we've got this problem, everyone's circling and swirling on it. So let's just kind of like sit back, let's simplify it. Let's talk about it as humans instead of like robots or resources. And then, kind of try to move on to what the next step is. And let's think about this logically. So that's kind of things that I do now. And then where I want to go is really more and helping kind of like the people stuff, like leadership development and that type of thing. So I guess I'm answering it in two different ways because I'm still trying to figure it out.
Right, which is good. And look, and this is a continuous process, because the world changes, your skills change, the needs of the market change. But ideally, and I'll kind of close the presentation with this in a few minutes, like when I finish up. But ideally, you want to boil this down to a problem or a skill set that is going to be evergreen, right? Regardless of the context in which you're working, regardless of technology, regardless of how people consume things, there are always going to be things like, yeah, we have to humanize this issue, right? Like we keep talking about this in the abstract of like, manufacturing or production or whatever it is, but really there's people here. You see this a lot in B2B conversations. People say, well, we're selling to a company. No, you're selling to people who work for a company. There's always another human interacting with you, right? And so humanizing interactions is something that we're always going to have to do, right? So as you start to kind of boil this down, give it sort of that future test a little bit. Like, will this still be relevant in 5 years, right? If the technology, like, virtual reality takes over, right? Whatever it is, right? Is this still relevant, right? Humanizing connections, absolutely, right? That kind of thing, which is great. Thanks so much for sharing. That was terrific, and excellent self-confidence. Well done. So cool. Thank you guys for doing that. I really appreciate it. And hopefully you're starting to kind of get a sense of where we're headed with this. So those were we went through the 5 qualities of becoming forever employable. The second half of the story is the steps that I took to get to where I am today that I think are applicable to you as well. And I want to give you examples of each of these and really start to give you a very concrete path to start to follow when you leave here today. And these are the 5 steps. We'll go through each one of these in detail. So let's start with step 1. Step 1 is plant a flag. Now, planting a flag is the sort of the manifestation of the exercise that you just did, right? It's declaring to the world that I am the expert in this particular field, and this is what I want to be known for. And as I mentioned before, planting your flag is an exercise it's a right sizing exercise. If you go too generic, if you say something like, and forgive me, Eugenio, consulting, right? I don't know what to come to you for. Like I'm known for what kind of consulting for who, right? If you take it down too small, you limit your audience to the point where there isn't enough of a market for you to attract ongoing opportunities, right? So if you were like, I do consulting for veterinary clinics in Argentina, right? Like that's probably too small of a market. I'm guessing, right? But the point is you want to find that right level where it's specific enough that people know exactly what you stand for, but large enough to where there's enough of a market there to generate opportunities towards you on an ongoing basis, right? And this is going to be a trial and error type of thing. But the people who have done this well are synonymous with the flag that they've planted. And I put out a couple options here, and you may not be familiar with all of these, but I tried to pick folks from various industries. So there's a gentleman named Eric Ries. Now, if you're in technology or business, you know Eric Ries because he sold millions of copies of this book called The Lean Startup. That's where Eric planted his flag. He's the lean startup guy. Jake Knapp, a friend of mine in Seattle. Jake Knapp planted his flag with design sprints, and he's known as the design sprint guy. You want to know anything about design sprints, Jake is your guy. Over in Switzerland, we've got Alex Osterwalder, who redefined how we talk about innovation and growing our businesses with business model generation and the business model canvas. This is what Alex is known for. This is where he planted his flag. Seth Godin, very popular. He's in the Marketing Hall of Fame. He's the marketing guy. He planted his flag here for a long time. He's grown well beyond that, but that's who he is. Sarah Cooper, during the last administration, made a big name for herself. She planted her flag as sort of a kind of a Trump lip sync impersonator type of thing, but that was her flag, and everybody knows her for that thing, right? And that became what she got associated with. Now, for me, the flag that I planted was this idea of lean UX. Now, lean UX for me at the time, which is 2008, 2009, 2010, was what I was doing at work. It was trying to bridge the gap between website design or web design and new ways of software development, agile software development, two things that were very difficult to bring together. It was a challenge that we were having at work. And it turns out that it was a challenge that lots of other folks were having outside of our jobs. And so this is where I decided to plant my flag. And that's where it grew from there. And you might ask yourself, well, Jeff, how do I decide where to plant my flag? We start with the exercise that we just did, right? What problem do I help people solve? And you can move on to this particular exercise. Now, this is an exercise, it says Ikigai at the top. Now, this is a westernized version of a Japanese concept called Ikigai. Ikigai means a reason for being, the reason you get out of bed every morning. Now, this is like I said, this is not the original Ikigai. This is a westernized version of it, but I actually really like this exercise because it forces you to answer 4 questions. What do you love? What are you good at? Those aren't necessarily the same things. Right? I love basketball. I'm not good at it, right? What does the world need? And what can you be paid for? And when we run this exercise, we work our way around these questions, answering them. Kind of, you can do a Post-it note exercise or whatever, write these things down. And the idea is to find answers that actually tick all 4 boxes. You're trying to find something that lands in the middle, hopefully more than one thing, but not necessarily more than one thing, right? You're looking for something that you love because you're going to spend some time on this, right? If you're going to build a platform on top of it, you're going to plant a flag here, you're going to spend time here. So you should love it. You should be good at it because you're going to share expertise. Hopefully the world needs it, so there's a market for it. And ideally, people will pay you for some of this so you can make a living off of this. And so this is a great way to start this particular exercise and to really start to think about what problem you help people solve and where you want to plant your flag. So that's step number one. Now, step two is to tell your story. And your goal here is to become a compelling storyteller. And this is where people get stuck immediately. The first question that they have is, what unique story do I have to tell? People get in their own heads and they let doubt take over, right? We start to think about things like, everyone has good experience, or she has way more to offer than I do, or I haven't done anything extraordinary. And look, the best part of your experience and of your story is not whether or not you started a startup and sold it for $1 billion, or you've run an ultra marathon, or you worked with movie stars, or whatever it is. The best part of your experience is that nobody else has it, right? Only you can tell that story. Nobody else can do it because you're the only person who has gone through everything that you have in the ways that you have done it. So only you have that exact perspective. And so you have to start telling your story from that personal experience, from that perspective. And that's really what makes the story authentic. Okay. Now, and that's where the self-confidence comes from, because you know what you're talking about. You lived this. This was your world. I started telling the Lean UX story on August 12th, 2010. It was the first time I gave a talk about doing anything with design and agile software development. Now, the reason why the date is important is because this is 2.5 years after my 35th birthday. This stuff takes time. It takes consistency, and it takes effort to build up a body of work, and then to get to a position where somebody says, okay, yeah, I'll give you a stage for 45 minutes. Okay, now share your expertise. A month later was the first time I ever said the words Lean UX on stage. It was at a conference in Paris, right? Again, 2.5 years. And one of the more transformational dates in my path to build this platform and change the direction of opportunities towards me was March 7th, 2011. March 7th, 2011, this article published online. Now, this was my first really big publication about Lean UX, this concept where I planted my flag. And it was published in an online publication called Smashing Magazine. In 2011, Smashing Magazine had 1 million readers. Today, it's about 10 times that. 3 years after my 35th birthday, I'm now 38, was when this published, and this really changed the conversation. This really took the conversation global, and it provided me with an opportunity now to start telling my story on a lot more stages and in a lot more varied channels. And I tried everything. I tweeted, and I wrote on Medium and on LinkedIn, and I answered questions on Quora. I even used Facebook. And most importantly, I began to build my email newsletter, and everything is about Lean UX. Honestly, the only thing we stopped short of doing when it came to Lean UX was Lean UX, the musical. We thought about that, decided that that was a bad idea, and left that one on the side of the road. But really kind of telling my story at every opportunity through every channel to really understand how to reach my audience and where my stories resonated. And in hindsight, I have a really clear sense of why that particular story resonated. Number one, it solved a real problem many people had. So we talked about what problem you're solving for folks, right? Hopefully you're solving a thing that a lot of people are dealing with, right? So I was solving this particular technical issue that a lot of people had. I was doing the work. I had actual real world experience. And so I was sharing from a place of authenticity, from a place of practice, right? Nothing was hypothetical. Everything was from experience. And I shared my work in a humble way. I shared all the stuff that worked for sure, but I shared all the stuff that didn't work as well and what we learned from it. And when you humanize the conversation with humility, which is exactly what we're doing here, right? We weren't perfect. We tried a bunch of stuff and it failed miserably, right? But when you humanize the conversation this way, you start to build that connection. And every single time that I tell my story, and you're noticing it happening here too, I just want to be clear, it's a little meta, but I'm doing it here as well. I provided practical, tactical advice. You can take stuff away from every presentation, every time I tell a story, and try it on your own. And this is what actually builds that authentic connection. And if you're looking for ways to get your story heard, right, there's lots of things that you can do as you start to share some of those things, right? You want to follow leaders in your field, right? Whatever your flag is, join their conversations, offer your feedback politely, share your work regularly. Don't just add to the noise, but provide value. Hey, I saw you talked about this. In my experience, I've seen it work differently. Let me share my experience. And when you see things that resonate, scale those. Talk about those things more. Double down on those ideas, and your storytelling starts to become more heard and more popular. So we planted our flag. We're telling our story. We're going to follow these new paths, because once you start telling your story, you start to generate new opportunities, right? All of a sudden, new paths open up, and you start to begin to attract opportunities towards you. Now, for me, this was super interesting and terrifying, is because the Lean UX conversation was taking off. People were asking me to talk about Lean UX, and I was doing less and less design work. And I told you before, I was already terrified about these younger, hungrier, cheaper, and most importantly, better designers than me. And so my skills are atrophying because now I'm being pulled away. But this is exactly why I started doing this. And all of a sudden, right, I find myself doing less and less design work because I'm traveling around the world and giving talks and teaching workshops. Now, one of the things that you discover along the way as these new paths open up is that there are specific opportunities that manifest as these paths open up. One of the things that I didn't know, but learned, was that book publishers go to conferences to see what are the most popular topics and who is speaking about those popular topics. And I was speaking about Lean UX. It was becoming an increasingly popular topic. And a book publisher offered me a book deal at a conference. Now, again, this was terrifying to me because this was going to pull me even further away from doing day-to-day design work. I decided to do it because this is exactly why I began to build my platform. I wanted to attract these opportunities. I just didn't tell the publisher one very, very important secret. And that secret was that I had no idea how to write a book. Really, like no idea whatsoever. I mean, the longest thing I'd ever written was maybe 1,000 words, and they wanted 50,000 words, right? Which to me was like climbing Mount Everest. There was no way that was actually going to happen. But this is exactly what I was waiting for. And people say, well, Jeff, you're super lucky, right? You're super lucky. You got that book deal. You're right. I was lucky, but I was prepared to be lucky. Right? I was mentally prepared for these opportunities. I was working to create these opportunities so that when they showed up, I was ready to jump on them. And in this case, it was writing a book. And sure enough, writing Lean UX was a tough couple of years, really tough. It took me 2 years to finish the book. I burned through 3 editors, and I wrote the manuscript 4 times, start to finish. Beginning to end, I wrote the manuscript 4 times, which was brutal. At some point, I had to assume the publisher was just going to give up on me, because every time I turned in a manuscript, they came back and said, nope, not going to publish it. But eventually they did. And on March 11th, 2013, Lean UX published. Now, again, notice the date. I am now 40. I am old, right? It's 5 years after my 35th birthday. It took me 5 years to get here. A ton of work, a ton of effort, a ton of consistency, but it paid off because Lean UX fundamentally changed my life. It's become an incredibly popular book. It's a textbook at Bentley, as we said before. It's currently in its 2nd edition, and my co-author Josh and I are finishing up the manuscript now for the 3rd edition. It'll be out this fall. So it continues to sell consistently, and I continue to be defined as the Lean UX guy because of this book. If you Google Lean UX, I will guarantee you that the top search result is me, right? Because of this book. And so this really fundamentally changed my life and really opened up even more new paths. Now, we've planted our flag. We've told our story. We're following these new paths. Step 4 is to teach. Now, this is the really interesting thing, is because if you would have asked me 15 years ago if I would be a teacher in 15 years, I would have laughed. No way, right? No way I would have been a teacher. That's what I do today. Everything that I do today is teaching. Every opportunity that I have to tell my story is teaching. workshops, conferences, webinars, podcasts, guest articles, you name it, right? These are teaching opportunities. And I say yes to everything. I used to say yes to everything. I say yes to almost everything now. I'm a little bit busier these days because every time that you teach, you get feedback on your material, you get feedback on your storytelling. You understand where it's resonating and where it could use updating. You understand where there are there are content gaps, right? And where you can actually improve the story moving forward, and you get better at teaching the material. And the better that you are at teaching the material, the better you are at the craft itself, right? If you can teach it, you can do it as well. There's tremendous opportunities to teach this stuff all the time. And this is a lot of stuff that happens kind of externally to an organization. But if you work in-house, there are lots of opportunities for you to teach in-house as well. And it's fantastic for your kind of internal forever employability, right? So you're the person who educates the staff, right? You teach them, you write for the corporate blog, you host the company podcast, you're at industry events because you're the face of the organization, you're an evangelist, that type of thing. Microsoft has had product evangelists for a long time. Lots of folks work in this evangelist role, internal trainings, etc. These are opportunities for you to teach your craft. And so teaching is absolutely key. So we planted our flag, we told our story, we followed the new paths. Now we're teaching this stuff on a regular basis. The fifth and final step, and the one that took me the longest to learn, and the one that was the toughest to really sort of understand, is to give it all away. Now look, you've worked for a long time. You have experience, you have expertise, and you expect to be paid for that experience and expertise. I do too, right? This is why this is unintuitive and worth kind of really doubling down on. The more you give back to your community, the more that you share generously your experience and your expertise, the more opportunities come back to you. The bigger your platform grows, the bigger the audience grows, the more you attract towards you. And so to do that, you need to make your work, your content, and yourself easily findable and accessible. If you don't currently have a large profile, post your materials where they can be easily found. Post articles, webinars, podcasts, blog posts, tweets, whatever it is, right? On sites where people go, Medium, Twitter, Substack, LinkedIn, a fantastic resource these days, right? Make yourself findable, and then start to build that platform for yourself. And then once you start to get that readership and that viewership to your content, bring all that in under your own domain, right? So I've been doing this for a while. And so now, right, all of my content lives on my site, and 99% of it is free. The blog posts are free. The podcasts are free. The videos of me giving keynotes are free. Right? The only thing you're paying for are books and workshops and training, right? That's about it, right? But the idea is the more that you generously give back, the more opportunities come back to you, the bigger the platform grows. And so content sharing is one way to do that. Building a local community is another way to do that. When I used to travel for work about a year ago, if I was doing a paid gig during the day, I would always do a free meetup in the evening for the community, right? Because I wanted to give back. I wanted them to know that I existed. I wanted to share my story. I wanted to hear from them. I wanted to take questions. And you can do that too. Local meetups, local conferences, ask a friend in a local business if you can give a talk at lunch for free to practice telling your story, build goodwill, build community, give back, and those opportunities eventually come back to you. Now, look, I'm going to wrap this up in the next 3 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes to take your questions. If you got any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Now, a few things to remember as we think about becoming forever employable. To become forever employable, you have to stay relevant. Staying relevant means staying active. So to be clear, this is work. Work to stay active in conversations. Work to have a presence in your industry. Work to do the work and then contribute and share it broadly outside of your organization. To participate in events, to participate in conferences, to do what you can to get your name out there and to get your expertise out there. And so no two ways about it. even if you're full-time employed, this is on top of your day job. And so you need to figure out how to squeeze this in the cracks of your work-life balance today. And it's tough. And I understand that. And I can tell you stories about how I did that and continue to do that today. If you're looking to shift gears, so let's say you're doing one thing. I talked to Tracy before. She says, look, I'm doing this now. I might want to do this other thing moving forward. If you're looking to shift between something that you're currently good at and to the next thing, my experience for me is to give yourself some time. For me, it's been about roughly 2 years to build credibility in a new topic before I need it. So I mentioned to you at the beginning of the talk that in reinventing these ideas, like taking product thinking and applying it, I'm applying it in HR a lot. Now, 2 years ago, I had no credentials in HR, human resources. I had no business speaking to HR professionals, but I've been learning and I've been engaging and I've been asking questions and I've been offering up some content. And it's to the point now where I'm being invited to participate in HR conversations. In fact, later, for me, it's later this evening, I'm on a panel called Design Thinking in HR, right? Which is something nobody would have invited me to 2 years ago, right? So give yourself time to move from one thing to the next and to build up that credibility through consistency. The path that I shared with you here today is one way to do this. It's the way that I did it. It is not the only way. Pick and choose the pieces that work for you, discard the rest. There's lots of other ways to get your name out there. There's academia, there's executive education teaching. There's all kinds of ways that you can start to build that credibility. So use what you want from my story and make it better. And then I'll wrap with this. It's a quote from Bezos, and I hinted at this a little bit earlier, right? Bezos says that the most common question that he gets all the time, and to be clear, this is the richest man in the world. So just to be clear about who we're talking about, right? So might know a thing or two. Bezos says, look, people always ask me, what's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years? And he says, I don't think about my business that way. I think about what's not going to change in the next 10 to 20 years. In other words, what are people always going to need? People are always going to need access to cheap goods quickly. They're always going to need to be entertained, right? They're always going to want to read, that type of thing, right? So I'm going to focus my business on the needs that are not going to change. Now, how I deliver that service over time, that's absolutely going to change. But the fundamental thing that's going to keep us forever in business at Amazon is serving these needs that are never going to change. The fundamental thing that's going to keep you forever employable is servicing needs in the business world that are never going to change. How you service them will absolutely change. But those foundational needs, the problems that you help people solve, those are the things that are evergreen that'll keep you forever employable. And so with that, first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thanks so much for listening and participating in the exercise. I got a lot out of that as well. Just a couple of quick plugs, and then we can do Q&A until the bottom of the hour. If you'd like a copy of the slides, the URL on the screen there, jeffgotthealth.com/slides. Just please go there and you can get a copy of the slides. I teach a workshop about Forever Employable called Becoming Forever Employable. We are finishing up the current cohort next Tuesday. In fact, there's a demo day from the next cohort coming up next Tuesday. If you follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, you'll see me promoted a couple of times in the next few days, and you could attend and get a taste for that. We're starting our next cohort in April. If you're interested in working with me on this, just go to becomingforeveremployable.com. All the details are there, and I'd love to hear from you. And on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if there are any questions at all, I would be more than happy to take them now.
And Jeff, we have a couple of comments in the chat. One is confirming your recipe to see if Alina's got your recipe right. And then there's an additional question. So if you're ready, I'll read Alina's question on your recipe to see if she has the gist.
I am ready. I might sip my water a little bit while you read it. That's okay.
Great. So she is confirming: 1, be amazingly good at what you do. 2, become a consultant. She's taking some great notes. 3, become a really good consultant. Alina, you're fantastic. 4, get to teach others and write a book. 5, do more consulting and get invited to increase awareness. Start today and reap the benefits in 2 to 5 years. Is that the gist of it?
It's part of it. It's not all of it. So let me rephrase. So be amazingly good at what you do is a bonus. Okay. Be confident that the experience that you do have is compelling and interesting to others, I think is a great place to start. The second step is then to share that story and start to develop a reputation for sharing stories about that particular topic. Now, it's up to you whether you want to become a consultant or not. I very firmly believe that you can generate opportunities for yourself to continue to be employed full-time in-house and still do this. Not every organization is going to love you doing this, that's for sure, but most organizations are going to be okay with it. And the opportunities that you create for yourself could simply mean that the next full-time opportunity will come from you being generous with your sharing. So I do believe that this works in an in-house capacity. It absolutely works in a consulting capacity. It also works if you want to build a business. In fact, in January of 2012, when I left my job at the Ladders, we started a product design and development agency in New York City called Neo. And the marketing that we did was content marketing. We wrote about how we work and our expertise to attract clients, and it worked that way. And so then, right, the idea then is that every time you share your expertise, you are testing the market. Is this valuable? Does it resonate? Should I spend more effort on this? If it does, then maybe it's worth more than tweets. It's worth a blog post or a Medium article. And if enough of those pick up enough traction, then yeah, maybe it's worth investing in writing a book. But I certainly wouldn't jump into writing a book before you've got proof in, viewers on blog posts, followers on Twitter and LinkedIn, retweets, reshares, inbound requests for you to give talks about this content, right? You want to make sure that you have an audience for the book when you ultimately publish it. And then the opportunities are going to continue to come in, and it's your choice at that point about whether you want to go in-house, be a consultant, build a business, whatever you want to do. So it's a mix of what you said, but ultimately, like, for example, so I want this thing like be amazingly good at what you do. Sure, right? I'm never going to say no to that, right? No, don't be awesome, right? Definitely be awesome. But look, I've given this talk to folks who have like 18, 19, 20-year-old folks straight out of basically either university or accelerator programs, right? Web dev, UX design, product management accelerator programs. And they asked the immediate first question is, Jeff, what are we going to talk about? I have zero, I'm 19, I'm 20, I have zero experience. Tell your story, right? Hey, I'm 20, I have zero experience, and here's how I go about finding my first job in product management. Here's how my first interview went. Oh, it was awful, right? I blew it. Here's how my second interview went. Second interview went better. I got called back. I still didn't get the job. Third interview, got the job. Awesome. First day on the job. Write about that, right? So you've got a story to tell. You start to build that reputation of generosity and sharing and that expertise. So write what you know. And if you happen to be really amazing at it, terrific. Or share in whatever format works for you. Okay. Cool. Good question. What's next?
So we have another question here. This one's from Patty, and she says, great presentation. When opportunities presented to you could take you in different directions, how did you assess which opportunity to invest yourself in?
Yeah, great question. So if you read the book, you'll notice that there's a lot that I take from product development and apply to the book. Specifically, what I'm talking about is hypotheses and experimentation. And so the question then becomes, if you have an opportunity or a couple of different opportunities, how can you test those opportunities to decide where to double down? And generally speaking, it means that you're going to run an experiment with those opportunities, if you can, to see if it's worthwhile investing further in it. So for example, if you get 5 different invitations to speak at 5 different conferences, right? Pick one and see how it goes. See if that was worth your time, and see if you enjoyed it, and see if it resonated. And if it did, accept more down the line. If you get an opportunity to write a book, right? Writing a book is a ton of work. And these days, you are left doing the lion's share of the marketing for that book, unless your last name is Obama, Winfrey, or Kardashian, right? You're on the hook for doing book marketing. And so and that's a lot of work on top of then writing the book, right? So before you do that, maybe you want to write a series of essays on Medium or Substack or wherever, LinkedIn, doesn't matter, right? To see if you can start to get some positive feedback from your target audience about that. Essentially, what you're doing is you're writing the book bit by bit in public. You're experimenting with the content to figure out how to focus it. And so really think about the risks involved with some of these, and then think about how you can de-risk the opportunities with lightweight experimentation. Because you want to do the least amount of work possible to de-risk these opportunities. Because if you anything more than that is wasteful, right? It kind of comes from lean startup and lean engineering. But that's how I think about it. The book really talks about specifically how to run these experiments, but that's how I de-risk. And sometimes you just have to jump in, right? Sometimes you can only de-risk so far, and you have to jump in and roll the dice and hope it works. But just kind of know what you're getting into up front. Ask a lot of questions.
That's great. And I think your comment on experimentation brings us nicely into this next question. What if I'm relatively, I believe the word that's missing here is new, if I'm reading this correctly. What if I'm relatively new starting my career? Would you recommend planting two flags, one for what I can currently solve and one for what I would love to solve?
So yes, and I would continually test both of them. The risk here is that you split your brand, right? Your personal brand. Right? Like, so you're doing this one thing. Are you one thing or are you the other? But initially you might want to test and see, like, should I really head in this direction, or is there more traction in this other direction? And again, those experiments come in the form of tweets, short essays, short videos, a podcast, an interview, a PowerPoint presentation, an infographic, whatever you want to make. But once you start to get a sense of where you're getting traction, then I would start to focus on one thing, because I think you dilute yourself, especially early on, when you are kind of going off in two directions that are not necessarily related. So it's a little bit risky, I think.
Thank you. And the next question we have is, what if the problem I help people solve doesn't answer the 4 questions? I believe this is referring to the Ikigai view. Something you love, something you're good at, something that's needed, and something that you'll get paid for. Do you have any advice for finding something that does answer those 4 questions? Is that addressed in your book?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely sounds like you need a new job. I'm sorry. I mean, look, so yes, so there's so the book does talk about this, and in fact, there's a workbook that comes with the book. If you upload a proof of purchase to my website, I send you a workbook. But essentially, look, I'll just give you the answer from the workbook. It really start to really focus on not just you've got professional expertise and you've got professional experience and maybe some professional passions as well, but you might also have some personal passions as well. Like maybe, like for example, I told you I'm a piano player. I have a personal passion for vintage electric pianos. And in fact, before I moved to Spain, I had a collection of vintage electric pianos. My wife let me keep up to 5 in the house. So that was great. And look, and I have an unhealthy amount of knowledge about vintage electric pianos, and I love it. Right. And I seriously considered planting my flag there and kind of building on top of that. It turns out that the market size for that is a little small, right? It's me and like 17 other nerds. And that's about it, who care about this kind of thing. But think about your personal passions, right? Maybe there's a way to build up sort of a secondary revenue stream, a secondary income stream with something that you love to do. That's a personal thing. And then at some point, maybe it starts to become your main thing, and you get to move away from the problem that you help solve that you don't love and that, isn't really fantastic at the moment. So think about your personal stuff as well. There might be something in there. And you can talk about it. There's plenty of people talking about pretty much everything these days.
Great, thank you. And I know we have about two minutes left. We have a couple more questions. What if you're at a senior level in your career and want to pivot and utilize your deep expertise in critical thinking in a complementary but different field? Do you have any best practices or suggestions?
Yeah. So this is the thing that I kind of was talking about there at the end, right? So if you've got 15, 20, 25 years of experience in a particular discipline, it's tough. It's tough to shake that off, right? Not that you're trying to shake it off, but it's tough to pivot. And so this is where you want to give yourself time, and you want to figure out sort of how to weave a story that says, yes, I did this for 25 years and I've got a ton of experience. And this is how I take that experience and start to translate it into this new field. In fact, that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this book here, right? I've spent the entirety of my career in digital product development, right? Why am I talking about careers? Right? Like, what credibility do I have? And I've been working on that credibility for a year. And if you read the book, you'll see that there's a tremendous amount of stuff that I learned in digital product development that I apply to career development now. And so that's the story that I'm telling, right? I'm taking my product development expertise and I'm tying it in. Look, is it always great? No, sometimes it's a bit of a stretch, right? Sometimes you kind of have to massage these concepts together. And you have to give yourself time, right? So that people can understand that you're going to start telling some new stories, some different ideas, and that's okay, because that's what I'd like to talk about now.
Thank you very much. And I think the last question here is something you've just touched upon, even in what you mentioned. Ria has the question: if you're of the age range between 40 and 45 and you want to change entirely from one industry, in her case, accounting and consolidation, changing entirely, will you say there is time to design a new path?
Absolutely, 100%. Right. I mean, look, I'm 48, and I'm sort of recreating a little bit of my career in this way. And yeah, you've got tremendous experience. You've got tons of stories to tell. There's absolutely no reason why it's never too late.
I think that's a good comment to end on. That's all of our questions here, and we're right on time.
Perfect, folks. Thank you so much, Laura. This was great. Thanks for letting me participate in this, folks. Thanks so much. Oh, by the way, I didn't put my email address in the chat. I think it was on that slide, but if you have any follow-up questions or any questions at all about anything, please just drop me a note. It is gothealth.co, not gothealth.com. But if you do accidentally type in jeff@gothealth.com, the gentleman who owns that domain is kind enough to forward it to me. So he's learned over the years. So thanks very much, folks.
And this was recorded, so as long as you registered, it will be sent to you. Between Jeff and I, we'll make sure it gets to you. Stay well. Great to see you all in the community.
Bye, folks. Thank you.